Good evening, everyone. To those of you here at FCSS and all the people who are at home watching, I'm Susan Flowers, and I'm a member of the Social Recovery Task Force that was put together by the town of Cochrane. The task force has been working hard to put together a series of different information sessions for all of you. We're trying to address issues that were brought up in a community survey that we implemented last summer. We were looking for information on how is COVID affecting our people in our community. Many people say that they want to stay connected to others, but how? They want to contribute to the community, but how do they do that? Tonight we have an awesome speaker here for you. I'm so happy to introduce David Irvine. Many of you probably know David through the community. He and his wife Val live here in Cochrane, and he has participated in many events here in Cochrane. David has developed great wisdom around leadership, connecting, communicating, and sustaining communities. He's been speaking, coaching, and writing books for over 30 years. His work is well respected all over the world by business leaders, entrepreneurs, and nonprofit organizations. I think you will find this evening to be inspirational. Welcome, David.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for those of you who are joining us online. This is a very unique experience. This is like, my mantra these days is we need to grant grace because we're all learning, we're all adapting, we're all finding a way through this, navigating our way through this, right? So I just am grateful. I'm going to start by sharing with you, this community means a great deal to me. Raised my kids here. We've been here since 1991. Raised my kids here, and we just feel a part of this community. Whenever I can give back to this community, what this community has given to me, an ounce of what this community has given, an ounce back, what the several pounds that this community has given me would be a great honor. So thank you, Susan. Thank you for this task force. Thank you for what you're committed to, the mayor and your team for facilitating this and for making these available. All right, I just had to get the guy with the man of vision up there because I was thinking, he's probably been social distancing for a whole lot longer than the rest of us have. So I just find that kind of fascinating, this cowboy country that we live in, and so there's good heart here. This is what I appreciate about our community. So this summer, I have to tell you, we spent some time touring the Yamnuska Wolf Dog Sanctuary. And I'll tell you, it is a fascinating place. And I would suggest that all of you in this community, if you're attached at all to wolves or to dogs, as I am, go out and spend an afternoon. It will be a very nourishing, life-giving experience. They can teach us, these critters, these wolves can teach us a lot about living together, about working together, about being in a community. Would you agree? So I have been studying wolves since I went out there because I want to learn from wolves. What can wolves teach us? And I came across a very interesting quote, strangely, by Rudyard Kipling. This is the law of the wolf pack. Now, this is the law of the wolf pack, as old and as true as the sky. And the wolf that shall keep it will prosper, but the wolf that will break it must die. As the creeper that girdles the tree trunk, the law runneth forward and back. For the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. So what makes a strong community? Strong individuals. What makes strong individuals? A strong community. We are so interconnected. And so let's stop and just embrace that. And by the way, you can define community tonight in any way you want. It could be a marriage. It could be a neighborhood. It could be a nonprofit group that you're involved in. It could be this entire community. I heard a very interesting, fascinating conversation, interview this morning, actually, with Jane Goodall. And the saying is, think globally, act locally. She said, to heck with that. I don't think globally anymore. It's too depressing. I just think locally and act locally. and do what I can. What is your local contribution? I don't have any answers tonight. I merely have questions. I'm going to start a conversation. I'm going to reflect on some things in my 64 years and 40 years as a parent. I'm just going to pass along some of my perspective to get you thinking about what really matters in our lives. There are times in our lives when we go on narrow roads. And at these times, we are fools if we try to maintain our usual speed. Folks, this is a time to slow down. And I'm going to take you on a journey tonight. I'm going to have us slow down. I'm going to have us reflect about what really matters in our lives. What really matters in this community. Why should we even care about a community? Here's some of my first perspective. First of all, there's a difference between a house and a home. There's a difference between an acquaintance and a friend. There's a difference between money and wealth. There's a difference between having a bed and having a good night's sleep. There's a difference between a standard of living and a quality of life. And there's a difference between a town and a community. Now, why should we care? Why not just have a house? Why not just have money? Why not just have a bed? Why not just have a standard of living? And why not just live in this town? I've always said that suburbs, we've been social distancing, honestly, for a long time. Circumstances, folks, do not determine a person. Circumstances reveal a person. We are in immense fear today. The pandemic did not cause that fear. It revealed the fear to us. People who are in fear today, no politician has asked us to be afraid. Politicians are merely doing their job to help protect us health-wise. There's the mental health aspect, which I want to address tonight. But no one has asked us to be in fear. But if it's being revealed, it's not from the pandemic. It's triggered by the pandemic. What is being revealed to you in this pandemic? Why should you even care about whether we live in a community or not? I don't know. It's not for me to decide. But it's for us to reflect on. And I happen to believe that if we don't care about the answers to some of those reflections, I don't know if our species is going to survive. Because the way that we have been operating is not sustainable. The great economist, Romo, oh man, my age is showing, but he's a Stanford economist, 10 years ago said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste long before this pandemic. Don't waste this crisis. I am not wanting to get through this crisis. I want to learn from it. I want to embrace it. It has turned my whole business upside down. It has helped me reflect on things. It has taken me to some of the darkest times I've ever had in my life in this last 6 months. And I will be sharing with you some of my own journey through this. But one of the things we must know is we're not alone. Are we really connected to each other? This is my message tonight. So there, I'm going to give you 3 things tonight. Here's my agenda. First of all, we're going to talk about caring, opening your heart. We're going to talk about belonging through contribution. And we're going to talk about resiliency through accountability and ownership. Hopefully it'll be a little different message that you may have heard before. But this is the agenda for tonight. Let's talk about, first of all, caring. I can't talk about caring without talking about my parents. My dad was the kind of guy, we lived on a little farm north of Red Deer. My dad was the kind of guy that when you went into the hardware store, it was an afternoon. Because he would stop and visit with everybody. And he would care. He would stop, and we would be lined up, the cashier with the cashier, and we could be lined up 10 people, and he would be visiting. His work in life was to make everybody feel special. And he was genuinely concerned about people. And I was so embarrassed. Now I wish I could have 5 minutes with my dad and take him shopping, take him downtown, and he could show me what he did, what he taught. We went to the dump a couple of times a month. They call it the dump in those days. Today they call it landfill sites. I don't think they call it the dump anymore. Well, you know what? There was a guy that actually lived at the dump. in Lacombe. And he lived on what everybody else dropped off, including the trailer that he lived in. It was an old trailer that somebody dropped off at the dump, and he lived in the trailer. Whenever we went to the dump, we went to the dump a couple times a month. Well, you know what? We'd take an afternoon there. Because my dad would stop and visit with Monty. I don't remember much about Monty. I just wanted out of there, but I didn't have an option because I had to go to the dump with him. But every time we went to the dump, we would visit with Monty. The only thing I remember about Monty is he smelled like dead rats. Like the guy stunk. And my dad didn't care. Because his caring went way beyond that. We lived 10 miles from that dump. When my parents sold the farm, Monty got on his old bicycle that he got from the dump and rode 10 miles to come to say goodbye to my dad. Everybody contributed. Everybody was part of the community for my dad. My dad taught me that there's the transaction of life and there's the transformation of life. Now, I teach this to leaders because that's my work, because I do leadership development around the world. And if you want to understand the difference between, you see, everything in life can either be a transaction or it can be a transformation. When you go and visit with the clerk, and you know what, these masks, when we're at the grocery store, the masks are, we have to work a little harder. But you know what, let's not let these things stop us from connecting. It doesn't mean we can't look at each other. You know what my photographer taught me? My photographer taught me that you can smile with your eyes. And when I'm smiling, I'm smiling with my teeth. And she said, no, smile with your eyes. This was long before this pandemic. You got to smile with your eyes. You know the other thing we need to do more of today? We need to speak up and talk to each other. We think that because we have a mask on, we can't talk. I haven't heard a politician say yet that we can't talk to each other. Even if we're walking down an aisle in a grocery store, say hello. We used to smile. Yes, we can't smile anymore when we're seen, when we have these masks on. But we can talk. We can say hello. We can make a connection. We can care. Don't let these things stop you. If you allow this to stop you from connecting to people, it just means that you weren't connecting before the pandemic and you're using this as an excuse to withdraw. If you look at our mental health rate, our domestic violence, this is revealing something very telling. So anyway, a transaction. This can be as simple as going to the grocery store. And you can have a transaction and you can give the clerk your credit card, and then the clerk gives you the groceries and you walk out, and it's a what? It's a transaction. Every cashier has a what? Right here, a name tag. You know why they have a name tag? Because they have a name. And do you know why they have a name? You know what a name means? They have a story. My dad would always listen to people's stories. And you know what? I get as busy as the rest of us. I just want to get in and get out. I got something more important to do. But something in our lives misses when our lives gets relegated to a transaction. Do we want to get to the end of our days, folks, and have on our headstone that we were really efficient in the grocery store? That we got in and out of there? Or that maybe we touched a life? It's the difference between being a father and being dad. Every single person listening to this had a father, but not everybody had dad. You see, it's easy to be a father. It's very easy to be a father. But when I talk to leaders about what's the difference, and by the way, if you can identify the difference between being a father and being dad, you will understand the difference between the transaction and the transformation. You see, if you got a 12-year-old who's sitting there with the device, and sometimes you have to be the father. Sometimes you have to be the mother. And you have to say to that 12-year-old, you cannot get on that device until you read for 15 minutes. Sometimes you just got to be the boss. It's a difference between a boss and a leader. But then there's another time where you can inspire that 12-year-old so much that they would actually rather read than get on their device. Now that is a leader. That's a whole different process. And that takes a whole level of investment. Now, we're not going to go through my long list here. in detail. But what I do is that I show the difference in organizations between the boss and a leader, between the transaction and the transformation, a job versus a life, a position versus presence, a plan versus purpose. Martin Luther King did not stand up in 1963 and say, I have a strategic plan. I have a dream that one day my 4 children will be raised in a world where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That's a dream. Why do you get out of bed in the morning? What is your dream? Well, sometimes I've heard, the number one reason why people get out of bed in the morning to pee. Well, that's a good place to start. But I suggest, folks, you've got to go beyond that. And if you can't think of a dream that's going to make this world better, to get you, inspire you to get out of bed, guess what? You've been too hung up on the transaction. And by the way, we have a transactional world. Anybody who has the courage to go into politics had a dream when they went into politics. And then the culture will drag you back into the cesspool of the transaction. And I'm not saying the transaction isn't important, but it is very easy to lose touch with the dream when we get pulled into the tyranny of the urgent. I have a story from this community that happened about a dozen years ago. And it's my way of honoring our police force. It's really interesting how fickle we get in this social media world. 3-4 months ago, our police force, our policing across this country was revered and honored as the first responders. And then all of a sudden, based on a couple of really important, serious images, yes, those were important, and yes, we have to take action. But let's not color it all. By the way, did anybody hear about the plane that landed at the Calgary airport this morning? Of course not. Why? It landed. We don't hear about the landings. But you would sure as heck hear if what? If it crashed, then you'd hear. Guess we have this economic system. And good news does not sell. It's a strange world that we live in. So we got to make stuff up. And the rarity in the social media world becomes the reality, and the reality becomes the rarity. We think that one little episode is the reality. It's one little episode. You got to be careful when you read the news. You got to get the whole spectrum, and the news will only give you a little spectrum. Don't you think that that little spectrum is the whole spectrum? Anyway, this is an RCMP story. About a dozen years ago, I'm driving downtown Griffin Road, Griffin Road, and the police sirens, the lights come on, and I pull over. And the police officer walks up to the side of my car. And I said, officer, I'm pretty good. I was really working at not speeding. Was I really speeding? He said, you weren't speeding, but you see that stop, actually back when there used to be stop signs on Griffin Road? And I said, no, you weren't speeding, but you see that stop sign? You just rolled through that stop sign. Now, you know what my parents taught me when a police officer pulls you over? First words out of your mouth should be what? Thank you. I got to tell you, this is a little side story to the story, but about 5 years ago, I'm driving through Calgary through a playground zone. And I missed the playground sign. 50 kilometers an hour. I'm going 50 in a playground zone. Police officer pulls me over. My dad's voice in my head, thank you, officer. He said, what'd you thank me for? I said, I'm glad it's you, not a child I hit. Have you ever thought to think about that? To thank a police officer for maybe saving your life? Anyway, this police officer in Cochrane says, he says, let me get your driver's license, get your driver's license. He did the routine, get the registration, goes back. Now, this could be a potential transaction. He writes out a ticket, I go pay the ticket, we go on our way. But this particular police officer on this particular night looked at me and said, before I give you this ticket, when he brought it back to the car, before I give you this ticket, I'm going to tell you why. Why I'm giving you this ticket. Wow. Now, when you know a why, you know you've crossed into transformation. I said, well, tell me why. And he got tears in his eyes. And he got really quiet. And I was waiting for an answer. He said, I just came from a 4-fatality accident where I had to take 4 dead children out of a vehicle because somebody went through a stop sign. And I would not want that to happen to you. Now, I've been telling that story for a dozen years to corporate audiences. And people tell me and write me that has made them a safer driver. Now, I can tell you, I won't lie and say I've never gone through a stop sign since then. But 9 times out of 10, you know what? When I go to a stop sign, I'll think of that officer. In 30 seconds, he transformed the way I drive. 30 seconds. It does not take years to transform a life. So I said, one day I want to meet this guy. So I'm working with all the detachment commanders in the East Central District of the RCMP a couple of years ago. And I told them that story, and I said, one day I got to meet that officer, but I had no idea who that guy was. Well, I'm talking to the RCMP. Don't mess with those guys. And he brought one of the commanding officer came with a, when he thanked me at the end of the day, he gave me a piece of paper, and he said, that ticket was written on April the 8th, 2008, by Mark Seaman, and he's still in Cochrane. You could call him and thank him. And I emailed Mark, and I thanked him, and we had a little connection. And I said, you don't have any idea. He couldn't remember that. He remembered the fatality, but he couldn't remember the stop. He couldn't remember the ticket. But he remembered the fatality, and he had no idea how many lives that he could potentially have saved. That's a transformational moment. Let's slow down enough to pay attention. Are we making somebody's day better? What's wrong with that for a purpose? I'm going to wake up today and maybe make somebody's day better. This is my brother. He was a rural physician in Sundre for 35 years. In 2013, he collapsed. By the way, first of all, before I get to that point, he was given the award for Alberta's Outstanding Family Physician in 2013. He was in Vancouver to receive his award. And 3 nights before he was to receive his award, he collapsed in the arms of his wife. 5 days later, he was diagnosed in the Vancouver General Hospital, the very hospital where he was born. He was diagnosed with grade 3 anaphylactic astrocytoma, a brain tumor that would eventually take him down. He lived 3.5 more years, and I cared for my brother for 3.5 years. I didn't do the heavy lifting. I went up to Sundre, drove up to Sundre, and looked after him, subbed off the caregivers for 1 day a week. He had his wife and 2 caregivers. You know, death will awaken you to life if you'll allow it. The guy had a bucket list. The year that he retired, he gets a brain tumor. You know what I've learned is live it now. You don't know. We don't know how much time we got. Anyway, I wheeled him across. I would wheel him across the street. He lived across the street from the hospital where he lived for 35 years. And his patients would come out and hug him and cry, and his staff and his team. And I said, what makes a great doctor? He wasn't just respected. He wasn't just admired. He was loved. He was loved in his entire community. He was a community builder. You know why he was such a great doctor? He was a great doctor. It's the same answer that makes you a great parent, that makes you a great mayor, that makes you a great leader in your community. You know what it is? He was a great doctor because he cared. He cared about his patients. He cared about his work. He cared about his community. Do you care enough to slow down and pay attention to what the people are around you? And it inspired me to write a book about caring. And I'll tell you, I used to think you had to know something to write a book about it. What I've learned is if you want to learn something, write a book about it and travel around the country. Although even though I don't travel around the country now, I'm experimenting with this. Folks, I want to talk a little bit about self-care, because this is something you got to care enough, not just about your community, but you got to care enough about yourself. And this is, I'm going to speak now from my own experience. It's an old and ironic habit of human beings to run faster when we've lost our way. Do you know that? When you get lost, anybody ever been lost in the wilderness? If you get lost, I've been lost. And the natural human tendency is to what? You speed up. You get faster. And what happens when you speed up? You get lost faster. So what do they teach you in survival school? To go against what's human nature and stop, slow down, and get your bearings. Stop and get your bearings. So it's very important right now for our own mental well-being to care enough about ourselves to get our own bearings. So one of the bearings that you can take is, what emotional season are you in right now? Now, I've drawn these emotional seasons out from my own dark period through depression. And I'll share with you just in a minute here what that has been like for me. Now, these seasons can last for minutes. And by the way, this is reminding me, if you let Nicole know, who set this whole deal up, I'll get you, if you'd like a copy of these slides, I will get these, a link to these slides to Nicole, and you'll have access complimentary to these slides. So these seasons in life can last for minutes, or they can last for months. And down in that bottom right-hand corner is called the surviving season. It's about angry and anxious and fearful and worried and grieving and self-doubt. I have never in the last 6 months been so riveted with self-doubt, because my work is to work in audiences. This is, I've done one other presentation in the last 6 months to a live audience. It's so invigorating for me, because this is my work. This is my life's work. This is my purpose. Is to I'm a human touch guy, and for me to sit in front of a Zoom calls all day is not easy for me. Not to mention the fact that I had to learn all this new technology. I had to build a whole new business. Somebody says, "Why don't you just retire?" I can't retire. You gotta find something better than this for me to do. I could never retire. I won't be a walking dead just wandering around doing nothing. And I got to contribute my gifts. We're going to talk about that in a second when we talk about belonging. I got to use my gifts. This is why I'm so grateful, Susan, that you would ask me to do this, because I get the chance to do this in a real audience. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And we're respecting social distancing here, and that's okay. That's great. So anyway, so I've never been so full of self-doubt. I've never been more afraid. I can't, what am I doing this for? I spent 6 weeks after this lockdown wandering the hills behind our house, wandering the trails, wondering, what am I doing with my life? And if anybody ever said, if I heard one more word, we're going to pivot our business, we're going to make a new business, we're going to create an opportunity, I want to kill them. Because I didn't care about pivoting anything. I just wanted to be depressed. Because depression is not, I have learned, having dealt with the dark night of many dark nights of my soul, depression, folks, is not your enemy. What happens is when you get depressed about being depressed, then you get depressed. But if you can embrace the darkness, it is the gift, it is what I believe is the voice of my soul. It's the way God talks to me. Because I don't listen until I go down. So I just knew and trusted that I just needed to be in this dark place. But what I did also know is that I have about 5 different things that I do every day to deal with my depression. One of which is I have to share it every day. I have to bring it up and out and share it. What's underneath the depression, the self-doubt, the fear, the anxiety. I have to share it. And when I share it in a community with people that hold the space, I don't have to put it on Facebook, but I have to bring it up and out. Sunlight, folks, is the best disinfectant. We learned this in high school biology. You got to bring it out into the open. When it festers, it'll poison you. You bring it up and out, and you accept it. It is a guest in your house, as Rumi would say. It's a guest. Invite it in. Listen to it. It is helping you transform into a new life. And it has been my best gift, is to honor that, but not to judge it and not to do it alone. So I went into that surviving season for some time. Grief. Folks, what are you doing with your grief? There isn't a person on this planet that has not lost something in the last 6 months. I haven't seen my grandson all year. Last time I saw him was at Christmas. He lives in the States. I can't get to see him. And it's just not the same. Yes, it's a good tool to have this FaceTime thing, but it's not the real deal. So I'm grieving. I got a friend in Boston that I've known for 30 years. She passed away she's 89 years old. We had a virtual funeral for her. I would have flown to Boston and been with her. I was convened over 950 people on the Zoom call for her funeral, her life celebration. I couldn't be there in person. None of us could. That's a grieving for me. What are you doing with your losses? Don't just brush them off and stay busy, keeping your head down behind your mask. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and she said, "How are you?" If you read my blog this week, you'd have heard this story, but I said, "How are you?" She said, "How are you?" I said, "I'm good," and then I had the party line. I'm readjusting, and because we hadn't talked for several months. She said, "David," after I went on for a long time and I gave my positive spiel, she said, "David, we're on the phone. You don't have to wear your mask." You gotta have friends like that. You gotta have friends like that. You don't need a ton. You just need one or two. And I broke down and we both cried together. But what we're missing. Yet, you know what? I love the fact that I'm not going in and out of airports anymore. And I won't be for some time. That's good. But you know what I miss? I miss this. I miss the face-to-face. And you know what I also miss? I miss being able to come up to people at the beginning of a presentation, shake your hand and look you in the eye. I miss it. It hurts. So what are you doing with your grief? I'm sharing it every day. I'm naming it every day. You know what violence is? Violence is what we do when we don't know what to do with our grief and our suffering. So this is where it's got to start, to acknowledge this and acknowledge when it's around us. And what really helps my depression is to talk to somebody else who's depressed. And then I find out somebody's got a real reason to be depressed. And it'll bolster me. In a community. This is what a community is for. Then you get depleted, you got the exhausted, and empty, and unappreciated, and overwhelmed, and disheartened. Then you can get up to this emerging side, and then you can get to the productive side. But folks, when I talk to leaders, I say, you know what? Don't be a cheerleader too much up here. You got to go through this first. Otherwise, it's not going to be real. Key principle when you're doing motivational talks, you don't give a motivational speech at a funeral. You got to grieve before you build. You got to honor this first in yourself. Now, I just want to take a minute here and talk about, oh, by the way, these are some strategies to get above the line, to go from below the line to above the line. Number one, recognize it. Stop and care enough about yourself to recognize it. No judgment. This is where I'm at today. And it is human, and it will lead you to a deeper place in your life. Claim it. Don't blame anybody. Don't get on Cochrane rant and rave and blame somebody else for the fact that you're hurting. Don't lay it onto somebody else. It's irresponsible. Sorry, the older I get, the more opinionated I get. But we're going to talk about responsibility here in a minute. Step back. Don't dump it on somebody. Step back. Create space for yourself. Share it. Breathe. Take a deep breath. I'm sad right now. I'm grieving right now. I'm hurting right now. I'm lonely right now. It's okay. Who can you share it with? Let it go, at least to set it aside. Don't dump it on somebody else. Resolve it later if you need to. But set it aside because you may be with your kids. Don't dump it on your kids. You can share it with your kids, but don't dump it on your kids because it'll turn to anger and impatience. And I'm going to get to that in 1 minute. And then return with composure. But no, you can return. You got to be, as a leader, you have to be composed. Our mayor, you understand this about composure. You can't bring all the stuff to your workplace. You got to be able to deal with it offline, but you got to deal with it. So let me talk for a second about anger, because it is becoming rampant in our society. So here's some indicators of anger: over control, irritability, impatience, withdrawal, shouting, and rage. These are what we call secondary feelings when we're dealing with anger. Criticism. I should have put criticism up there. We could name a bunch more ways that people express anger. What have I missed? How else do people express anger? Any other words? Blame. It's an anger. And let's really nail somebody that's in the public. We love to nail people in the public. We love to nail people who have put their lives on the line and says we're going to be a law enforcement officer. We love to nail people who are politicians who have the courage and guts to stand up for something in our society and help lead this world. We love to nail people who are visible, who are in a position of authority. And you know why we do that? I think it's because we've been abused at some point in our life and we take it out on somebody else. So you learn when you're in a position of authority and people are nailing you, you've learned not to take it personally. Because it always has more to do with the person throwing the arrows, the stones, than it has to do with the receiver. So what does anger do with another person? It invites another person to also get angry. And so one person might be shouting, one person might be withdrawing, one person might be criticizing, and then it goes back and forth, and you get into what I call a secondary cycle. Key principle, folks. You will never resolve anger at a secondary level. It's like an oil light on a car. The problem is not the oil light. The problem is not the anger. There's a problem underneath the anger. You'll never resolve the anger if it's secondary. You can't fight hard enough. You can't criticize hard enough. You can't be violent enough to resolve anger. It's there, it's real. You can name it, but you don't have to act on it. It's irresponsible. In fact, rage is never appropriate. Never. Maybe rage might be justifiable if you're saving a person's life that you care about. Maybe. And you have to go into a rage but you know what? How often would that ever happen in one's lifetime? It's never appropriate. If someone gets enraged at you, it's never about you. If you kept interrupting me tonight, I'd get angry. You know that? But if I went into rage and lost control of my anger, it's not about you. That's something I'm bringing into this room. It has nothing to do with you. Never appropriate. So what's underneath anger? That's a secondary response. What's underneath it is a primary response. Fear, self-doubt, loss, grief. And you won't resolve anger until you get it down to a primary level. Now, maybe you can't get it down right now. Maybe you just got to have a good argument. Nothing wrong with a good argument if it's respectful and no one's being hurt and no one's over top of somebody else. There's not positional power. If it's a good, equal, respectful argument, but you're not going to resolve the argument by having the argument. You can only resolve the argument when you step back from it and say, you know what I was really feeling? Underneath that, I was afraid. I was feeling rejected. I was feeling lonely. I was feeling full of self-doubt. I was feeling hurt. And then underneath that are needs. Now you begin to negotiate what needs you have. Folks, we are not a very skillful species at knowing how to deal with anger. And it's not getting any better. I'm seeing it everywhere. And when I see increased criticism and increased violence, it's really worrying me. So we got to care enough about our own mental well-being that we can acknowledge what season we're in and deal with some of these underlying feelings that are human and understandable. Let's find a community to build those in. If you did, it's also part of my blog this week. I share the story of a Hasidic Jew. This rabbi, and he has students, and the students come to the rabbi, and they say, how can we get rid of the darkness and the evil in the world? And he gives them, he says, takes them down to the root cellar, gives them a broom, and says, sweep the darkness out of the room. And they sweep, and of course it doesn't work, and they think the guy's crazy. And they says, here, take a stick and beat the darkness out of the room. Now go and be violent and get angry at the darkness. And see if you can violently demonstrate to get rid of the darkness. And of course, all of this is to no avail. So how do you get rid of darkness? You would do it with a light. This is our work in being a strong wolf in the pack, is to bring a strong light to our community. This is our work. What are you doing to light your light, to bring a better gift of your light, your gifts? And we're going to talk about how you bring a light. But I have to tell you, the farm that I grew up in, we didn't have central heating. I may not look that old, but I'm old. We didn't have central heating. It was my job to get up in the morning and stoke that old potbelly stove. And it took some while to get the fire going, to get the heat going, to get the light going. And I have found for myself that for the first hour of my day is the most important hour that I use to stoke my light, to get my light burning for the day. Don't go out into the community until your light is strong, until at least it's real. So I take quiet time in the morning. Now, by the way, I'm not doing this because I'm a saint. I'm doing this because I've had to suffer depression, and I know that there are certain disciplines in my life that are absolutely paramount to my mental well-being, or depression will consume me. So one of the things, I do about 5 things every day, and one of the things I shared with you earlier is that I share this every day. I have some quiet time. I'm very careful about what I eat, because depression certain kinds of food will fuel depression for me. I'm ruthless about this for my own well-being. I was told by a doctor, you know how to have the key to a long and happy life? Get diagnosed with a chronic life-threatening illness and have to take care of it every day of your life. So because I've had to take care of my sensitive nervous system and my depressive nature that I inherited as a gift from my father, because I have to take care of that is the reason why I'm probably healthier today than I would have been if I hadn't had to deal with this. I'm very grateful for having to struggle with this, although I wouldn't suggest that you have to go through that path, because I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It's hell. You know, when one door closes, another one opens. You know what they don't tell you? Is it's hell in the corridor, in between. Okay? So what are you doing to stoke your fire? If there is light in the soul, there will be beauty in the person. If there's beauty in the person, there will be harmony in the house. If there's harmony in the house, there will be order in the nation. And if there's order in the nation, there will be peace in the world. This is where our work is. How can I bring my light more fully to this world? Now let me talk about belonging through contribution. That's through caring. Does anybody have any questions to reflect on? It's a little challenging because I've got many of you are online, and so if we have any questions come in, Nicole, you can feel free to, I'm happy to entertain them. Any thoughts about my first point around caring? Caring about yourself. You know, the interesting, it's a paradox of self-care. For those of us who care about our community and about others, the very thing that it takes to care about other people makes it difficult to care about ourselves, because that's what makes us who we are. I was the caring one in my family. My parents struggled in their relationship. They brought their own pain in their relationship. And it was my job to kind of be the family therapist when I was 5 years old. They didn't give me that job, but I took it on. So the very thing that makes me capable of being able to take care of people also makes it difficult for me to take care of myself. And I've had to go down that road through my own darkness. All right, belonging. So we got to care, first of all, right? Open in your heart. Number 2, we got to belong through contribution. I learned this from my daughter, who's now 24. How many of you understand the difference between a contribution and a chore? Kids are born with a desire to contribute. Let me give you a formula for how to raise unaccountable kids. Just do everything for them for the first 10 years of their life. I once read an article that said that we now have machines that we do for kids, 200 things that we do for kids now that kids used to do for us. Washing dishes, we now have a dishwasher. Washing clothes, collecting eggs from the chickens, milking the cows. The kids used to be needed to do those things. Now we just do it for them. Now we raise kids like they're in a hotel, and we bring them their dinner, and we clean up after them. And then we wonder why they're not motivated. Kids are born innately with a desire to make a difference. We now know this. Babies in cribs in a nursery, if one baby is crying before they are anywhere near the capacity to know how to be empathetic, they have an empathetic cry to respond to another's crying. It's in us. It's God-given. It's innate that we want to make a difference. You ever bring out a vacuum with a 2-year-old? They will ride that sucker. They want to what? They want to help. But 2 barriers stop us from having kids help us. Time and technology. It's a whole lot faster to do the darn thing ourselves. You ever bake a cake with a 4-year-old? Do you know how long it takes to bake a cake? You can't be in a hurry if you're allowing kids to contribute. You ever fix a tractor or fix your vehicle out front? You got a little kid around? They'll want to come out and what? Grandpa, let me help you. Dad, let me help you. It's an innate. And if every time we say, oh, you know what, we got to make this efficient. We're in a hurry here. Go away. Well, sometimes we're human. That's going to happen. But if you do that every time, then we wonder why when they're 10 years old, they're not motivated to do anything except sit in front of a device. Don't get me started on that. Better not buy your kids any devices until they're at least in high school, until they can pay for them themselves. Anyway, but chores. We all got chores to do. I remember my brother, when I was 12, my brother was 16, we used to have these family council meetings, beef and bouquet sessions. We could express appreciation, bouquets, or we could complain. But if you complained, you had to come up with a recommendation. And my brother was complaining about all the Joe jobs. I got to take out the garbage. That's a chore. My parents, in their great democracy, said, well, what's your recommendation? He said, what I'd like to do is take over the family income tax. Now, my brother was brilliant. My parents looked at each other and said, so much for democracy, but they gave him the income tax. My mother, to the day she died, would say it was the only time that the books were balanced. My brother was brilliant. That's a contribution. Now, he still had to do the chores. We all got chores to do, but we need to feel like we're needed. We're doing something important. Communities, I don't know. John Kennedy had this right. Don't ask what the country can do for you. Ask what can you do for your country? This is a contribution statement. Don't ask this. Where did we get this idea that this community had to take care of me? This community is not separate from me. This community is a part of me. And the way that I can make a better community is to contribute. I'm getting ahead of myself. I love this story. This is Benny Patrizzi. Patrizzi was an Italian immigrant and veteran who looked after the towels of the New York Rangers from 1942 to 1995. And when they won the Stanley Cup, Mark Messier said, Benny's got to get a ring. Because if Benny doesn't get the ring, I'm giving him money. Because he understood that whether you're picking up the towels or whether you're scoring the goals, everybody plays a part. Everybody's important. He shines the shoes, carried errands. He deserved the ring just as much as the players did. And Mark Messier was a strong enough leader that he made that happen. So, folks, we all have a purpose. The Japanese have a word for this. It's called ikigai. And it's where your gifts intersect with your passion, intersect with your contribution. And when you can align your gifts and your passions to your contribution, then you become alive. Don't ask what the world needs. I've told my kids this for years. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world needs is for you to come alive. One of the reasons I went into such a depression for 6 weeks after this pandemic is that I couldn't find my purpose. Because this is my purpose, is to teach. Where am I going to live this purpose? It's the same thing that if I were to retire today, I would have to live my purpose. One of my goals is to be able to do this without having to charge money. So I can do this voluntarily for everybody. and just give of my time because I have to use these gifts. And one of the reasons why retirement is so difficult for people is because they've lost their purpose. Their whole work was this. I happen to believe that the most important contribution that you make in life, you don't get paid for. Ask a parent, ask a volunteer, ask somebody who's contributing to this community. But here's your job in this community. You want a strong community? Don't sit and complain about all the stuff that's not happening. Find your gifts, find your passion, and make a difference in this community. And you know what this community is? It's a rich array of opportunities for anybody who has a passion and a gift to bring to this community. And it'll be fostered. It will be appreciated. It will be valued. Somebody in this community needs your gifts. Stop complaining and stop living on purpose. Start living on purpose. That makes sense? We got a purpose. And this is what keeps us alive. This is where we belong. You don't sit back and wait to belong. Listen to those innate voices in you that says, you know what, I can make a difference here. Now I'm going to spend a little time on resiliency. And I'm going to talk a little differently about resiliency than what you might think of, but I'm going to talk about accountability, I'm going to talk about ownership. This is what I learned, and I'm going to get to my mother here in a second, what my mother taught me. So first of all, I learned on the farm that accountability is the ability to be counted on. Henry Ford said it this way, you can't build a reputation on what you're going to do. By the way, you also can't build self-respect on what you're going to do. You got to do it. That's what earns a reputation with yourself and others. Now, this is the farmhouse where my mother was raised. 10 kids were raised in that 900 square foot shack, 2 of which didn't make it through childhood. There isn't one, by the way, if you want to raise accountable kids, I got a little tip for you. Poverty really helps. It's not absolutely necessary, but it really helps. There isn't 1 ounce of entitlement in my mom's bones. Okay? At my mother's funeral, I found her book, a quote book, that she had collected over several years. 78 years old, and she was an amazing teacher. I know Susan knew my mother very well. They were very close, very connected, and she made a contribution, my mother, to this community, Joyce. But in her quote book, I found her quote. By the way, just a little side story. She died broke. She spent all my inheritance, which she should have. Would you agree? Do I have any right to that inheritance? What would you rather get from your parents? A rich financial inheritance with no character and values, or character and values and no money? Guess what? You get the character and values, you can create wealth and much, much more. I got the character and the values. So my mother wrote 3 things to me in her will. To my son David, I leave my passion for learning. I got her library. In my library is a book that was written and signed to my mother in 1930 by a woman named Nellie McClung. Wow. I got her library book. Number 2, I got her piano. 1902 Heinzmann piano. They just don't make those pianos anymore. And she said, with that piano, I leave you my love for music that I know and hope you will transfer to your kids, your daughters. 3rd thing I got was this quote book. And in that quote book was her definition of maturity. The ability to do a job whether or not you're supervised, finish a job once you started, carry money without spending. Well, 2 out of 3 is not bad. Eh? And number 4, be able to bear an injustice without wanting to get even. And then she said, maturity doesn't happen with age. It comes with the acceptance of responsibility. She lived this. She modeled it. By the way, I don't think it really sunk in for me till I was in my 40s. You know, the saddest thing for me is that my parents aren't seeing the fruit of their labor. You know, it's like planting a tree. There's an old Zen saying that the person who plants the tree will never see the beauty of the shade. That's the suchness of life. That's the stuff that I just wish, although I probably feel closer to my parents now that when I sit with them in my quiet time in the morning than when they were alive. Here's what my parents taught me. They taught me the importance of being an owner in life instead of a renter. No one will ever think less of you for raising your hand and saying, I'm responsible for this. When we walk through a park And there was some garbage in the city park where we often would go into my dad was the director of FCSS, well, it was the Preventive Social Services in those days for the city of Red Deer. So this wet year task force here is really connected to my heart. Anyway, I'm getting a little off topic. But when we walked through a city park, my dad would, and he saw garbage, he would what? Pick it up. I said, Dad, it's not our garbage. No, but it's our park. You walk out of a hotel, what do? It was very rare that we ever stayed in a hotel. We'd save up enough money to stay in a hotel. Dad would always go around and what? I can tell who the leaders are. I can tell who the leaders are. When we rent church off basement buildings for the support group that I'm involved in, I can tell who the leaders are. The leaders will be the last ones out, and they'll make sure all the lights are turned off. Some people just walk out, don't even notice they left the lights on. You got kids at home, they're probably not going to turn the lights off. Why? Because they're still renting. They're still living in the hotel, renting the place. They don't own it. I have a good friend who used to, and he still had a landline. I called him not that long ago, and I said, is Bob home? And some guy on the other end, I know who he was. I said, is Bob home? Nope. I said, can I leave a message? Nope, I don't have a pen. I said, do you have any idea when Bob's going to be home? No idea. I said, who is this clown? I said, I thought he was a burglar, caught him in the act or something. I said, who are you? You know what he said? Oh, I'm just the renter. Hung up. Just the renter? It's not, you ever hear this? Not my job. I'm just renting it. It's not my community. I'm just renting it. No, got to be an owner. That's where you get resiliency when you make a decision, and it's a decision to be an owner. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with renting, but even if you rent a property, act as if you what? You own it. Act as if you own it. We institutionally deny the fact that we're actually creating the leadership and the culture that we so enjoy complaining about. Deciding that I have created the world around me, and therefore it's up to me to change what, to make it different, is the ultimate act of accountability. All this time that we spend about all the politicians in our country, they're not doing this. Are politicians perfect? Of course not. But folks, if we took all that energy and just listen to a talk show, it'll make you sick. You get on talk radio and you just hear the anger and the criticism and the take all of that and do something useful in the world. Yes, if you've got some anger, own it, name it, claim it, share it, and then let it go and get contributing. Have I said that enough tonight? All right. So how do we do this with kids? Well, now I'm going to cross a line here, and I'm going to get into some stuff around parenting, my philosophy around parenting, because this is where it starts. For those of you who influence kids or raise kids, I'm going to give you my little parenting philosophy here. I'm no expert on parenting. In fact, I think I figured out this parenting by about the time my kids left home. What do you want for your children? So what I do in my old parenting workshops, when we used to do parenting workshops, I would put all these words on a piece of paper. And then I would have them sit in groups. What do you want for your kids? And then we would play them off against each other, just like a hockey tournament. Well, if this were which would come out last? Which would come out last? If you had to choose athletic or attractive, which one? Talented or confident? Confident or healthy? Happy or popular? And then we just cross the ones off. The one word that stayed on there and hung around the longest was, what do you think? Right there. I want my kids to be happy. I'm going to submit for your consideration that's not a sustainable goal. It's a human goal. I understand it's a goal, but it's not a goal. By the way, if there's any of you who had parents, any of you in this room who have parents who are 80 years old, who still have their faculties about them, they're still alive?
Mother of 90.
Wow, perfect. Okay, go ask your mother what the number one goal was for her when she was raising you. And when I asked my mother that, I said, did you want us to be happy? Happy? What's that have to do with anything? Here's what I want for you. I want you to learn 3 things. I want you to be a person of strong faith. I want you to be a person who learns to work hard, and I want you to be a person who's committed to service. And if you do those 3 things, guess what? You'll be happy. But it's not my job to make you happy. And this is where we have fallen down, in my opinion, in the last couple generations. Happy versus resilient. Happy is a temporary state of pleasure. By the way, if you want your kids to be happy, you have just handed them a loaded weapon. Because now they're in charge. Because all it takes, when you have a 2-year-old that slams the door and says, I hate you, and your job is to make them happy, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm so sorry for being so hard on you. We can't have you be unhappy. Guess what? Happiness is a part of life. What we want to make sure is when they're unhappy, they have somebody to share that with. Yes, I understand you're unhappy. Welcome to life. And I'm here with you, and you're not alone, and we're going to get through this together. Because if you have, I have a craving sometimes to make my kids happy. I remember my daughter when she was in university, and she double parked, and she had an $80 parking ticket. And I had a craving to what? A craving to send her a check. And by the way, it's really easy when you don't have the money. But when you have the money, it's so easy. Oh, she's on student loan. She's what? She's unhappy. And I have to make her. And so my wife had to yank me aside and say, you know what? Is this the best thing? Let's think about this. What's our goal? Resiliency is an enduring condition of self-respect that emerges from one's confidence in our capacity to learn to deal with the reality of life. It's finding the strength and grit to go on even when the world threatens to take you down. That's what I want for my kids. And if we make them happy all the time, they're not going to have that grit to do that. They're not going to have the strength to do that. They're going to get really anxious. I learned this on the farm, by the way. I had to unlearn it when I was a parent because you know what? I understand this. I have great compassion for this desire to make our kids happy. But I have to remind myself it is not the right goal if you want to have sustainable kids. Doesn't mean you have to make them unhappy. Life will make them unhappy. You don't have to make them unhappy. All you have to do is support them through their unhappiness and make sure they're not alone. So we were raised with chickens. My mother said, don't name the chickens. So I'm this caregiver. And the chickens are has anybody here watched the chick peck its way out of an egg? It is painful. It takes about, I've never gone through the whole thing. It takes about 24 hours. Now, me and my caring nature, guess what I wanted to do? I wanted to make the chick happy. Oh, you look really unhappy. I'm going to make you happy, so I'm going to help you. I'm just going to get rid of some of this shell for you. Make it easy. Guess what happens? It'll kill a chick. It dies. It needs to go through the process. The painful process to have the strength to survive. Help, folks, isn't always helpful. So you want resiliency? It takes 2 wings to fly a resiliency plane. You've got to support kids and you've got to push kids. And by the way, you don't even actually push. You don't have to actually push kids. You just have to make sure life will push your kids. What you have to do is just make sure you don't get in the way of life. And you're there with them. I think this is a tremendous opportunity. You know, we ran that session last month for helping support. See, this is a supportive community that says we got all kinds of resources to help you with your kids going back to school, dealing with the anxiety. Totally understandable. This is a new environment, new school, new protocols. Everything's new. But I am so glad we encourage kids to get back in there. Get on the horse. You can do this, but we're in it together. This is an adventure. Got it? If, by the way, if you, and this is where we have gone down, I think as a generation, I'm just going to make my judgment and I'll let it go. But for the last couple of generations, we have over-supported kids. And if you've come from too many demands, my mother, when she was raised, 1928, you know, by the way, it was 6 miles to school both ways. It wasn't uphill both ways, but it was 6 miles to school. We measured it. My mother, as the story goes, in grade 1, got strapped on her first day of school. Now, by the way, she got on her horse and rode her horse 6 miles across a railroad track. Could you imagine putting a 6-year-old on a horse across a railroad track going 6 miles, say, giddy up? I don't think her dad was there to say goodbye to her. She just went out, got on the horse, rode in with her brothers and her sister. She got strapped. Do you think she rode home, showed her welts on her hand to her parents? And do you think her parents got on the horse and rode 6 miles in for a parent-teacher interview? I'm not supporting corporal punishment. Believe me, we got to be much more creative than that. You know what happened to my mother? What do you think happened to my mother? Now, a lot of people say, well, she got it when she got home. Are you kidding? She's too smart for that. She never told anybody for 10 years. Now, that's too much demand, not enough support. She did that alone. Too much demand. But if we're not careful, what can happen is we can overcompensate and say, I'm not going to raise my kids the way I was raised. So I'm going to give them everything I didn't have. And we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And we've forgotten that, you know what? It's not the good old days. We don't want to go back to the good old days. It's just the old days. But we've had some good values that came out of those old days. And part of the values is you can deal with this. You can do this. My mother was not the most nurturing in the world. She set a role model. She was an encourager. She believed in me. She said, you can do this. These are the voices that I remember from my mother. I don't remember sitting on her lap and being very nurtured. I got the nurturing from my dad. My mom just wasn't that kind of a person. And I've learned to appreciate that. She was wise. She was encouraging. She gave me the strength, but she gave it to me by finding my own strength. I just have to tell you, I remember I got a 22 when I was 12. And I went and killed a blue jay. And I was so happy about killing this blue jay. And I went in and bragging to my mother. You know how my mother handled that? She stood at the kitchen sink and she wept. That's all she did. You know what I did? I never killed another bird after that. That's the way my mother taught. She didn't preach. She lived it. Anyway, what happens, folks, when we over-support our kids? 4 unintended consequences. Number 1, we get entitlement with kids. And Brené Brown, I love her definition of entitlement. I deserve something just because I want it. Where did we ever deserve to have a good community? By sitting and waiting for it. Number 2, we get snowplow parents that prepare the road for the child as opposed to preparing the child for the road. We make it too easy for kids. Number 3, oh, here's one. This is a little humor. I've decided I want to be a millionaire when I grow up. Well, you have to work pretty hard to get $1 million. No, I won't. You will. Me, I just want to inherit it. Number 3, we get anxious kids. That comes from a lack of confidence in your ability to handle the demands of life. Just think, you coddle your kids for 18 years and then send them off to college? What are they going to be except anxious? Because you haven't equipped them to deal with the stress of life. All right, and then number 4, you get burned out parents. So if you're burned out, and by the way, this relates to caregiving as well as it is to any parenting. Help isn't always helpful. So folks, I got to wrap this up. So just in the next few minutes here, let me give you any questions on those 3 points. Any questions come in?
Nope.
I hope I'm just...
You got some claps.
Oh, good. Good. Well, let me just share it with you. It's just in wrapping this thing up. So my whole philosophy around leadership is called The Other Everest. This is the book I wrote. And my whole premise around this book is this. We all know that the tallest point on the planet is Mount Everest at more than 8,000 meters above sea level. What's less known is that the lowest point on the planet is in the Mariana Trench at more than 8,000 meters below sea level. It's virtually an inverted Everest. We live in a world that says we honor height. We honor the next achievement, the next summit, the next goal. Folks, depth is just as important as height. In fact, I'm going to suggest that the leaders who really make a difference in their communities, in their families, and in their businesses bring depth to that. Here's another quote that I got from my mother in her journal. Every parent, no matter how hard they try, will be both a blessing and a curse to their children. How many of you can relate to that? My hope is that my children will appreciate the blessing, if not immediately, then later in life, and perhaps more importantly, that they will take the curse and, like an oyster irritated by a grain of sand, over time use it as a catalyst to build layers of character and understanding, thus producing a pearl. You could sit and reflect on that for days. And it isn't just the parenting that we need to turn into a pearl. It isn't just our parents' relationship. It's every difficulty that we have in life. We have to come to face it. And that's what makes us a better person. It's treating this whole pandemic like a hero's journey, that we can get through this. We just watched a movie a couple weeks ago called Stronger, about the guy in Boston who had his legs blown off in the Boston Marathon. And the whole process of how he came through that, a stronger person by embracing the darkness through it all. Leonard Cohen said it this way: there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That has been a real source of strength for me, to appreciate the cracks that I have in my personality. We all have cracks. We all have difficulties, and that's how the light gets in. But the goal in life is to turn those cracks with gold and fill those cracks with gold. That's where our greatest gifts are, is where we've been wounded. That's where we can make our greatest contribution in our community. Eleanor Roosevelt, but by the way, I like to really study some of the leaders that I admire. And Eleanor Roosevelt said it this way: every time you meet a situation, though you think at the time it's an impossibility, and you go through the tortures of the damned, once you've met it and lived through it, you find that forever after you're freer than you were before. How many of you can relate to that? This is what makes a great leader. Study the lives of people who have taken the journey down, the journey inward, the depth of their darkest parts of their soul. Nelson Mandela, 27 years unjustly imprisoned. And what did he say when he came out? His other Everest journey was 27 years in a prison cell. And the first words that came out of his mouth, let's forgive. Those were not empty words. Those were deeply ingrained in him through the process of coming free. Eleanor Roosevelt probably did more in the last century to bring the world together after Second World War than any politician. We lost a good one a couple of weeks ago. Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. Read about this woman's life, what she went through, the darkness that she had to face to be where she is today, and the legacy that she left. I love this little saying: the lotus flower, a symbol of awakening in Buddhism and other spiritual traditions, blooms in the murkiest, muddiest swamps. Its roots begin under the swamp water, and its buds reach their way to the surface, where they burst forth into stunning pink or white flowers. If you want the beauty of the lotus flower, there's no getting around the mud. So my question is, what is your mud right now? What is the mud that you're dealing with? Don't run away from it. Don't escape from it. Face it. And what is your lotus that's coming out of it? That's my message. And let's do that in the form of a community. So in conclusion, I have been embarking these last few months in an immortality project. It's a term that I got from a guy named Ernest Becker, who wrote a book called The Denial of Death. And at some point in our lives, the older I get, the more I begin to think, I want to do something that's going to leave a legacy, that's going to live beyond me. I'm becoming more and more aware of that. And I begun to think about what drives my life. And I'm going to leave you with these questions. What drives your life? When you cross a line, because we spend the first half of our life with appointments and schedules and goals and productivities and activities and achievements. But something will happen in our life where we shift and we begin to go from our phone running our life to a compass running our life. And we begin to look at values and dreams and passion and purpose and legacy and meaning. And we begin, and I believe that our young people today are asking that, taking that authentic journey sooner. They're wiser today in many, many ways. You know, they still got to learn to be accountable, but they're learning to be that authenticity is there. If you carefully consider what you want to be said at your funeral, you will find your own definition of success. This is what I got from my brother. When you have your health, you got 1,000 wishes. When you don't, you have one. It's precious. Take care of it. So I've invested in this relationship with a woman named Allie Stone, and we're building an Authenticity Institute, and we're offering a course. We've just got a couple of seats left if you're interested. For the next 3 months, we're offering this course. Just let me know if you're interested. We can help you. But in conclusion, I've been on this project for the last 3 years since Hal's death, and it's called My Wall of Influence. And some of you have heard me tell this story, but these are the 25 most influential people in my life. The people who have inspired me and shaped me and made me who I am today, who are leaving a legacy in my own life. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of questions. Number one, if you were to do this exercise, and by the way, you will never get a more powerful leadership development exercise than when you start to examine who would be on your wall. And write them a letter if they're still around, and if they aren't, write them a letter. Some of them I have sat on their gravesite and wrote them a letter and read it to them. Every one of those people has a story. And ask yourself, what was it about their life that made them the influence, the person that they are? And my experience is, it's from their depth, not from their height. Second question that I would have for you, that I will leave you all a challenge with, is whose wall will you one day earn the right to be on? What if you could step into this community every day, however you define community, and say, I'm going to be committed to earn the right to be on somebody's wall, not because the wall is important, but because the impact is important. And how would that change your life if that were your guiding force in the course of the day? Okay? After one of our 4-day retreats that we've now put online, a participant was walking around, because we take leaders, we help them, we unplug their phones, and we take them into their hearts, and we have 4 days up at the Banff Center. And we say, you know what really matters to you? And we start to have them be guided to lead authentically from their hearts. And they really do. They leave their devices at home. Some of them really struggle with that. But you know what? They're so free. It changes the whole atmosphere when they're not checking their phone all the time. When they can allow their some space to do this. And after the retreat, I always recommend, take some time. Don't go right back to your daily life. Take some time to chill, to walk around up here, to reflect. So one of them was walking around Lake Minnewanka and was reflecting on the ideas that he had learned and the actions he was going to take. And he sent me this photo shortly after. And he said this: attached is a photo that symbolizes for me the role of an authentic leader. The fur is bent from the ongoing storms, but stands tall to hold the space where the aspen can grow. That's what an authentic leader does. A great leader will inspire people to achieve a goal and get people working together to achieve that. An authentic leader will help people find their voice and their passion and their gifts along the way. That's what my hope is for you, that whatever you do, however you define a community, that you will build a stronger community through your authentic presence. Thank you so much for your attention tonight. It's been a pleasure. Okay, thank you. It's been an honor.